Good afternoon, my most courageous. Here again, those that have come to return. We are going to continue what we began yesterday, but I'd like to do a little bit of review because we might have a few new folks here. And we won't have quite so much the need to have conversations today. Tomorrow and the next day, we definitely will. However, the teacher part of me just really loves it when the class moves forward. So if anybody is sitting now in the far back and says, oh, this is really too far away, I'd like to get up and move closer, this is a great time to do that. Secondly, I want to find out how many of you brought your books? Lovely, lovely, lovely. How many need to still get a book? Okay. Steve? Should we go ask Sandy to come over with another supply of books? Sure. Do you mind? It'll be just a little bit. So we're going to be introducing ourselves to our Comfort for the Day book today. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to find out how is it useful for us in our grief? Because when you open it up, you see all these lined pages and you go, what in the world is this for? So we're going to help you figure out just how to use your Comfort for the Day book. Doesn't that sound like a good plan? So, just want to do a little bit of a review. Yesterday, we talked about that our grief, what was the word? Our grief matters, remember? Our grief matters. And our grief matters to God as well as it matters to us. No longer do we need to live forward from here on, discounting our grief, sweeping it under a rug, putting it in a back closet, and letting it get old and stinky and still negatively influence our lives. So when we think about grief mattering, then today we're going to go, as someone in the audience asked yesterday, but she hasn't told us how to grieve yet. I didn't, because we had to establish that grief is natural, normal, and necessary. It matters. And so today we're going to take a look at just how do we grieve. If we do not admit that our hearts are broken, if we say this loss, this grief, this pain doesn't matter, how much more difficult will it be for the one who desperately wants to bring healing to our hearts to do so? That simple turn to God, and we're going to take a look at some scripture today that is a role model for us for this turning of healthy grief. So we're going to look at our grief emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So let's see what we can do. I am using a new clicker, and we'll see. Oh, there we go. What do you see in this picture? Just talk to me. What do you see? A grieving wife. Who's with her in the picture? A baby. Where is she grieving? In the cemetery. Do you think it's right on top of her husband's grave? Yeah. Can you see what's on the blanket? Yeah. Is this young wife doing something important? Absolutely can. This young woman, this young wife, along with her little baby, are grieving. They're feeling the feelings, they're expressing what's happening. Would we want to take this away from her? You all said that really strongly. You all go to the front of the class. Absolutely. So as soon as we get that this woman is grieving, this is super important. Now, some of you are getting up to go get your books. You're welcome to do so. Sandy just came. And if you want to wait until the line goes down and then go, we'll give you a few minutes to do that. And or listen while you're there. So we've all agreed that we would not want to take this experience away from this mother and her child, would we? So this I can show you right now is a picture of healthy grief. I'm going to take a look at why this is a picture of healthy grief. What are these components that make this picture a picture of healthy grief? So my definition that works best for me, and we talked yesterday that the only cure for grief is to grieve. This phrase comes from Dr. Earl Grollman. And here's the complete quote that he makes this phrase in. Grief is not a disorder. It is not a disease or a sign of weakness. Read this out loud with me, everybody. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual. Did you say that? Say that one more time. Necessity. This is a necessary thing. This nebulous thing called grief. Necessary. We're going to discover what makes this necessary today and how to grieve. It says further on, it is the price you pay for love. And the last statement is, read it all out loud with me again. The only cure for grief is to grieve. And who's telling us this? Who's role modeling this to us? Not many. So this is why you are among the most courageous in all of the campground to be here today to learn about the necessity of your emotional, physical, and spiritual grief, and that the only cure for our grief is to grieve. Now, I need 3 volunteers. You're not going to have to speak, but I would like you to come up on the platform. Ken, would you like to do that? And 2 more? Please, thank you. And 1 more. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, I think I've got 1 too many. I've got 1, 2, and 3 right here. Thank you. Do you mind waiting for the next time? Okay. Ken, do these stairs work for you? Okay, fantastic. Okay. So, I'm going to have you come over here on this side where everybody can see you. And Ken, I'm going to have you be the griever. I'm going to need you to turn around so you've got your face kind of right here. And this ball of yarn is going to represent Ken's grief. And this ball of yarn, can you see that it's multicolored? You can see that a little bit? Okay, so Ken is going to just pour out his grief. He's just going to let it go out on the floor. And when it's about half done, stop, okay? Now, the 2 of you, if you'd come on either side of Ken, Ken's just going to let this go down to the floor. I want you to kick at this and really mess this up. And just do that while I just talk here for a minute, okay? So I've got these volunteers, and they're just kind of messing with Ken's grief. They don't know how to deal with him. Ken doesn't know how to deal with himself. And he just keeps pouring his grief out. And it's just pouring out all over the place. And we're going to be to this in just a minute. So you guys can do this and watch the screen, and you're going to be really extra skilled. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about, how many of you need a handout still? Raise your hand, and if somebody would like to help with a handout, and if someone gets a handout for these ladies and for Ken, put an extra one there. There we go. Okay, we've got someone handing them out in the back. On this handout, it lists what are some unhealthy grief experiences. So our first one, if we are going to grieve in an unhealthy way, we're going to pull back from people and isolate. And that's one of the sure quickest signs for us to realize, oh boy, I'm moving down an unhealthy path in my grief. The next one is that we don't care for or attend to our personal or physical needs. Okay, time out, everyone. These will have no order to them. They just have to have an order in order for us to read them. But in our life experience of grief, they have no order. And Carolina, put one just behind that folding chair for Ken on his chair there. How's that ball coming? Is it pretty messed? No, just get it all messed up. We don't want it to be able to come out.
That's what I did.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I think it was all coming in.
Yeah, just, you can use your hands if that's even better. And so, unhealthy grief means we remain stuck in anger and denial. No, leave it all knotted up. Yeah, there we go. Good job. We get stuck in anger and denial and regret and blame, sadness, depression. And it's just like we hit a wall, or we hit a path, and that's the path we stay on, or that's the wall we keep hitting ourselves against. And that's a sign that we are not experiencing healthy grief. We resist or mask, sometimes even medicate the emotional pain. Oh, wow. We can medicate it with food, comfort food. We can medicate it with, okay, that's a good job. You guys can stop. Perfect. Just leave it all right there. Lovely. Okay, you guys can sit right back down, and you've done a perfect job of doing that. I'll show it to everybody in a minute. So masking means that we go, if ever anybody asks you, well, how are you doing today? What do we often say? Yeah, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. And we just wear the okay mask. Or we wear the Sabbath mask, and we come to church and we smile and we say everything is just fine. Sometimes we get really serious and use substances or activities or relationships to distract the pain. What did we learn about pain yesterday? Does it have a purpose? It's there to give us an alarm that we need to pay attention to something, doesn't it? And so when we don't let it do its call to action, as if I, had that broken leg and I didn't attend to that pain and I didn't have an action for that, and I said, no, my pain is too much. I'm going to just put on a whole bunch of painkiller on my broken leg, and then I can keep moving. How many of you watch football? Well, we know the game, right? They don't do it as much today, but they used to do it in years past, where they would inject that football player with all kinds of pain medication, wrap that ankle, wrap that elbow, wrap that whatever, wrap those broken ribs, and they'd send them right back out there to keep going. Now, how intelligent is that? Yeah, I'm sorry, it just doesn't, A plus B doesn't add up for that kind of activity. So we can't do that emotionally for ourselves either, just to distract ourselves with activities, even really good activities. If we're not doing our grieving work, we'll not make progress towards healthy grief, will we? We can also shut out those who care and want to be of support when we're not grieving in a healthy way. We practice blaming to distract our guilt and our regrets. Wow. Sometimes we don't even blame, we just shove it all in another closet and let it sit there, festering. We're ignorant about or chooses not to do grief work. How many of you have heard the term grief work? Couple of you have, because you've been at Payson. Good team over there. So today we're going to learn what grief work is and why it is so valuably important to grieve in a healthy way. So these are a list of some of the things that we do when we are grieving in an unhealthy way. So I'm going to ask you a question. Take a look at your paper. I'll put our last one up. We maintain an animosity or disconnection with God as a source of help or grief. Some of us can even go down the path of saying, this is God's fault. He's to blame. Been there, done that. I know that path. So when we look at the list of unhealthy ways to grieve, do you find yourself somewhere there? Yeah, we do. And it's not to be ashamed of, because our question all along is, who has been your role model for healthy grief? Few of us have had one of those. And so we would naturally do the things that we think our culture tells us to do. Now, for those of you that have your Comfort for the Day book, I'm going to ask you to open it up to page 11 and 12. And in this book, there is an explanation about some of the emotions that come with grief. If you would like to pick up a book, Sandy's still here. Pages 11 and 12, you're going to see some emotions up in the box up there. How many here have heard of the 5 stages of grief? Lots of us. Can anybody tell me where you first heard them? In school? Nursing school, okay. In a grief group. Anybody else? Where did you hear about the 5 stages of grief? In hospice, okay, yes? In a divorce recovery. Okay, so remember I had Ken up here with his 2 not-so-good helpers? And they just turned this ball of yarn into a mess of yarn. So if you're making any notes, you could write down right now that grief is messy. It is super messy. It's not neat and tidy. Not at all. We've got a picture up here that's a ball of yarn with a whole bunch of emotions written on that string, kind of like this string with all of its multicolors. In your book, Comfort for the Day, on page 11, there's a spiral example of how grief works. Now, this messiness and that spiral, do you see anything that looks like the 5 stages of grief? It's not the page 11 and 12? 12 and 13? Okay, so it's 12 and 13? That's fine. That's one for you to fill out. So if you look on page 12, there's some words on it. Page 13 has a blank. Okay, do you not have that in your book? Go ask Sandy for a different book. You must have an older edition. So here we go. Nothing in your book, nothing on the screen, nothing in my hand. Does it look like the 5 stages of grief? No. That's because today I would like for you to be further informed. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross first understood the 5 stages of grief as she observed those that were dying of terminal illness. She watched that their very first reaction was this shock. And then they moved towards denial, like this can't be possibly happening to me. This isn't my blood work. This isn't my test. I can't have cancer. And then they moved from there to bargaining. There's got to be a way to get out of this. Or depression, and then bargaining, and then finally accepting the fact that they are dying. Now, those 5 stages started with a living person who worked through till they came to their acceptance, hopefully before they died. That makes a pretty logical straight line, doesn't it? And you go from one experience to the next to the next. But you know, after Dawson died, I couldn't find myself on that straight line. I looked more like that spiral, where I would experience one thing and think, oh, okay, I'm just gotten through that. And another week or 2 or 3 or 4 months down the line, I'm right back at it again. Anybody have had that happen? Anybody know that your grief is super messy? It's not on a nice, neat continuum? And this is a really important thing for us to understand for our emotional grief, that it doesn't fit into anybody else's pattern. Who was here yesterday that can tell me why that is so? Why does it not fit into anybody else's pattern? Nice job. We all grieve uniquely. And so what comes in one order for one person is not going to do that for the other person. Do we get that? So healthy emotional grief is going to accept that it's going to not be in stages. It's not going to be a straight line. I'm not going to start at A and go B, C, D, and E, and I'm all done. It's going to accept that it is messy and it has lots of different paths. So, on the healthy grief side, let's take a look what that looks like. Healthy grievers are willing to allow others to be helpful to us. We don't say, oh no, I'll do this all by myself and isolate. In fact, healthy grievers might even reach out for help because we know we can't do this all by ourselves. This was never intended to be in this kind of pain and do this by ourselves. Healthy grievers learn and practice the vocabulary of grief. Those words that you see on pages 12 and 13 are words that now become something that you're familiar with, and you're not shying away from using them to help you describe what you're experiencing. Healthy grievers practice patience with the grief experiences. There's no need to rush this. There's no need to be angry, upset when you cycle back through it again. We practice honesty and forgiveness with ourselves and with others. Now, this piece about forgiveness we're going to talk about tomorrow in detail. But honesty, oh boy, this is so huge for healthy grievers. Healthy griever is a person who makes positive choices to care for and nurtures their body, eating healthy, resting, and exercise. We're going to take a look at what that looks like in just a little bit. We choose to do our grief work. Okay, what's grief work? What does it look like? Well, it starts out with journaling. How many have ever journaled? Oh, a few hands. How many have never journaled? A lot more hands. How many of you think about things? All the time, exactly. Okay, so when a healthy griever is processing their grief, they're thinking about things on paper. And I'm going to tell you why at the very end of our session today, because it's so important. So that's a piece of your grief work. What is another piece of your grief work? Reading. Reading about other people's stories, other people's experiences in grief, finding out how they've processed something that might help you with an idea. Just to understand grief and loss in its, because someone else has gone before you, you can learn from them. Wouldn't that make sense? Okay. What about planning and preparing for those difficult days? You know, whether it's a divorce or whether it's a loss of a relationship through another way, those family holidays have some real difficulty attached to them, don't they? And if it's the death of someone that's precious and dear to us, they bring another layer of difficulty to those holidays. I've just been coaching with a family who has just passed their 1-year anniversary of the horrific, tragic death of their 22-year-old son who was crossing Interstate 80 in California at 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 days before his graduation from UC Davis. One of the things she just told me as they passed through their first-year anniversary was, Karen, thank you so very much for helping us plan for every one of our firsts for our son. She went on to say, this is the one piece of advice I give to everybody else. Make sure you are intentional and you plan about those days. You see, stepping into those days unprepared and unplanned, what's that going to look like? It's going to look like a deep, dark hole. It's going to feel like a chasm that's so far away from any support and help and comfort. But if, on the other hand, we made specific plans and we really said, we're going to do such and such because we want to honor our son, our daughter, our father, our mother in this way, we want to recognize that there's difficulties around these holidays that come when relationships have been severed and broken, and there's still people living, and how do we do those holidays in a way that is kind and gentle? That's part of our grief work. We might join a bereavement group. We might meet with a grief coach or a counselor. These would all be choices we make. So we could call these grief choices or grief options, or just simply grief work. Now that you've got an idea about this grief work, is any of it too hard? It might be unfamiliar territory, and there might be unknown aspects, but is any of this too hard? Not too hard, especially when we are assured that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. You see, isn't God's word available for our broken hearts? Absolutely it is. We are willing to accept the value of pain as healthy grievers. We're not going to run away from it. And we find truth to be a source of comfort, encouragement, and hope. That truth is the truth about ourselves as well as the truth about God and Jesus. Some pretty wonderful, healthy grief. What do you think? Do you want to do some healthy grieving? Do you have a better picture of what healthy grieving looks like? Is any of it too hard for us? Unknown and unfamiliar, yes, but not too hard. So let's take a look at one of our examples that comes from King David, the example of a king. We know that as we take a look at his Psalms, they're his poems. They are his journaling. They're his putting stuff out on paper. His thoughts went out on paper. Maybe a scroll, not a piece of paper like we might have, but he was still putting them out there. Feel the emotion that he's putting here with me. Read out loud. Save me, O God, for the floodwaters are up to my neck. Deeper and deeper I sink into the mire. I can't find a foothold. I am in deep water, and the floods overwhelm me. I am exhausted from crying for help. My throat is parched. My eyes are swollen with weeping. Let's see if my clicker keeps going. Waiting for my God to help me. Wow. Could you put those kind of thoughts on paper? Is David being honest here? Does he have these emotions that are just all jumbled up like this ball of yarn? And he's sorting that out by finding language and getting it out of his body. We're going to talk about how important that is in just a minute. But right now, Steve's going to talk to you, gentlemen, about the importance of men's grief.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Ladies, you can listen in if you'd like. Some of what I'm going to share, Karen has shared already, and she'll probably reemphasize it again. But in our work, we find that men and women grieve very, very differently. And as I've worked with men over the last several years, I find that we men have probably, again, have not been given a role model or anybody that can give us any kind of help to grieve in a healthy way. We've been given models, you bet we have, just not good models. I've heard so many men say, I never, ever saw my father cry. I never saw my father express any emotion. So again, that's passed down to that person, and so again, they feel like, I guess we're supposed to just suck it up when we're in deep grief. King David showed us that it was okay to express emotion. He was very expressive. Some men say, well, I just wasn't raised in that kind of environment. I'm not saying that every man has to grieve the way David grieved, because again, David's David and we're us. But I believe that we men need to be given permission to grieve in the way that we grieve best without any other expectations on us. Unfortunately, society has placed big expectations on us through Hollywood, through the people around us. I remember when we finally moved to Alaska many years ago, I had friends that were fishermen, bush pilots, and something sad happened to one of them one day, and I saw a 6'4" man, 260 pounds, weep. And I thought, wow, I've never seen a man cry like that before. And it was very refreshing. I realized, well, maybe I should be able to do that. So I had three major thoughts today that I want to leave you just very briefly about. There's dozens of ways we talk to men about grief, because we men are actually very quite complicated, ladies, if you haven't figured that out by now. And I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts here. First is that we men have been told that when in grief, we need to be strong for our families. I see this all the time in the Facebook groups of men in grief. I need to be strong for my family. A gentleman named Zig Ziglar put it really, really well. He said, gentlemen, in the time of grief, this is not the time to be strong. This is the time to be human. This is not the time to be strong. This is the time to be human. Our children, our wives, our immediate family needs to see us grieving the loss of a loved one, not being stoic and sucking it up. Now, maybe if that works for you, I'm not saying that one size fits all, but I'm just, again, giving all of us permission to go ahead and do what our gut's telling us to do, but our brain's telling us to do something differently sometimes. Second thing, men need other men. When in grief, we need another man to come alongside us and to tell us that it's okay. I don't know how many times I've gone to a man in grief and we have hugged. Not the pat thing that us men do, an embrace, where it says, I love you and I'm here for you. Pat says, I'm not quite comfortable with that. If you have to pat, that's better than no hug at all. But if we can learn, men, to be there for each other in grief, to choose to put ourselves aside and to enter into that gentleman's pain, the other friends or family members' pain, trust me, it means a world to them to have somebody that they can go to and know that there's a strong man there for them. Doesn't mean that women can't encourage, but it's when in deep grief, a man needs another man to grieve with.
Amen.
After our son died, for months after he died, I knew that every Friday night, a close buddy of mine, who had never had a loss like we had, but chose to enter into my pain, would call me up. Steve, I know Friday nights are really, really hard. And I'm just calling to let you know I'm thinking about you tonight, because I know the weekends you have a lot more time to think, and I'm just here for you, and if you need to ever call me, I'm here. And he has always been. In fact, a year ago, I lost my beloved pet basset hound. Because he'd had a basset hound, I wanted one too. And for 10 years, we loved our dog, and we finally had to put him down. Very painful for those of you who have lost pets. Guess who called me up about a week later on Friday night? Same guy. Hey, Steve, saw that you'd lost Chumley. Just want to let you know that we're thinking about you, and we know how hard it is to lose a beloved pet. I love that man. You see, he's just chosen to enter into my pain. I love that. Last one. We men so much need to know that it's not a problem of weakness to be ashamed to ask for help. You know, we all have the jokes of men not wanting to ask for directions, or I'll do it myself. I still do it. Karen will tell you I want to do it all by myself sometimes, and then we go ask for help. But for men to ask for help is really, again, one of these Hollywood things where we're supposed to suck it up and do it, be strong. This is a time when we need to go get help. Karen used the illustration yesterday of the broken leg. Imagine someone limping into the emergency room, weeping and ashamed because they had broken their leg. And the doctor says, can I see? Oh, I really don't want you to see it. It was so dumb of me to break my leg, and the fact that my femur is sticking out of my leg, I just feel so bad. No, we're here to help. We're here to help you. You can't reset that bone on your own. When we suffer a huge loss, men, of a child or a spouse or a parent or a sibling, it's okay to go ask for outside help. Again, that's not a sign of being strong. That's just being human. I need additional help. About a year ago, Karen and I were conducting a 6-week seminar in Northern California. And there was a gentleman that started coming every time we had the meeting. It lasted for once a week for 6 weeks. His wife had died a year before. He was 82 years old at the time that she died. And he was just so brokenhearted over the loss of his beloved wife. But he said, I realized how much differently I could have been. I should have been more attentive. And there was a lot of regret. But at 82, he said, I know I need to learn more about how to do this better. He never missed a night. And when the program was over and he'd utilized the book, Comfort for the Day, and had come to the program, this is what he said. It says, your book and your program has helped me so much over the past few months. I now feel I can find joy in living again. Thank you so much, was a little note that he dropped to us. This is not about Steve and Karen, but about the power of just learning how to grieve well with the power of the Holy Spirit to help us do that. So men, in summing up, be willing to grieve when it comes. Don't fight it. When you grieve, grieve, and when you don't grieve. Find a man. Look for a man that you can go to. And also, if you see another man in grief, those of you that are in that place, be that man to go to him and say, I'm here to help you. Don't just say, call me if you need anything. Go and be that person. And lastly, don't hesitate to go and ask for help. And the very last thing I want to leave you with is the idea that we are never alone in our grief. Jesus says, I will never leave you or forsake you. So he walks that path with us. He's walked it before us. He's walked it with us now. And he'll be here walking it with others after we're gone. So thank you so much for being men today. Ladies, thank you for listening. And I trust that we men can begin to model healthy grieving to our other men friends, but also to our children and our grandchildren so they can see what healthy grieving really looks like.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Did that help, gentlemen? Hear it from another man. We find that definitely does. This next slide just is affirming that our emotional grief is, what's that word? Necessary. There's no way of skipping over this, pretending it's not going to happen. And is our emotional grief understood by God? Absolutely it is. It absolutely is. Let's move on to our physical grief. This quote by Carol Batchelor was written in an article that she wrote about her grief after the death of her husband. Look what she says. No one tells you that bereavement causes physical pain too. It felt like every cell in my body was screaming the agony of separation from their opposite number in him, meaning her husband. Wow. In your book, A Comfort for the Day, I believe it's on page 16. If I didn't get the right page number, you are welcome to correct me. There is this picture of this image, this grieving person, and the places where they are grieving physiologically. So is it on page 16? Did you all find it there? So that way you can look at it up close and personal and see what the words are that are talking about here. But I want to talk about a few things that you're going to see there. There's reduced mental focus and clarity. Right off from the bat, the shock that takes place when we encounter a loss or we're absorbed in an ongoing loss, it is going to affect how well we think, how well we can make choices and decisions. Take a look at some of the other things you see on that image. Do you see that there can be chest pain? There's digestive tract issues. Can you see that there is an entire body, muscles and bones can ache? And on the other side, we see that there's a reduced immunity function. In other words, the strength of our immune system has almost been wiped out. And the people that know and have done research have said this is going to last you for about 12 months. Now, why would 12 months be involved in a depressed immunity? What's the correlation there? What do you think's happening? I heard it, all of the firsts. You see, just about the time we pick ourselves up and are maybe beginning to take a deep breath, many of us encounter that first. And then a next first, or a series of firsts. And with each one of those firsts, it rips open the heart, the pain, the crushedness of our grief starts all over again. And so by the time we get to the end of that 12 months and we pass that threshold of that first anniversary, our body has encountered that slam all through those first 12 months. And so it's going to react and it's going to respond. It can't help but respond and react. Do you know that your heart, mind, body is all one system? Do we get that? Right? So I'd like for those of you that have your book to open up to the pages in this section on understanding your physical grief. And I want you to share that with the person that's next to you and come up with what is going to be your plan for how you want to. No, don't do that yet. I'm ahead of myself. We've got to talk about tears first. Do you mind? Let's talk about tears. Up here on the screen, we see 4 samples of tears. One is the tears of grief, the tears of change. There are tears from an onion, and there are laughing tears. Now, they're under the microscope, and so microscopically, all 4 different types of tears appear different under the microscope. Now, chemically, there's only one of those squares that has toxins in them. And since we're talking about the topic, it's probably pretty obvious. It's the tears of grief. Exactly. The tears of grief are actually physiologically releasing body toxins that build up. Now, when we go through grief and losses, it's like a huge stress to us. And our bodies respond to stress by releasing a certain chemical hormone called cortisol. And that cortisol has a purpose. It helps keep the body parts running, but it distracts the mind from being able to think clearly. But it creates a residue that's not good for the body to maintain that for very long. And so many years ago, a founder of psychology in England in the mid-1800s wrote this: the sorrow that has no vent in what? Tears may make other organs weep. Wow. Today, medical science is affirming that this connection between body, mind, and soul is so connected that when we don't take care of ourselves with healthy emotional steps, it makes our bodies physically unhealthy. And so it really is important for us to pay attention to what we're doing so that we are taking care of ourselves and our bodies in a healthy way. So Comfort for the Day was written so that you could have some resources to know how to take care of yourself in a healthy way. So if you would just like to take a look at those pages, I believe they're like 14 through page 20, there are some great ideas on how to respond to these unhealthy things that we could build up in our lives, that we could make a choice differently and grieve in a healthy way. So everybody that has a book, would you just raise your book up high so I can just see who's got one and who doesn't? Okay, so Ken, if you wouldn't mind, just open your book and let the people in front of you, if there's someone in front of you or behind you that doesn't have a book, just show them those sections in that book. And I want you to just kind of get together, just really like close, not have to make a big group, but find somebody with a book, look through those pages and say, oh, I could do such and such with my choices to grieve healthy in a healthy way. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes, and like yesterday, I'm going to go over to this camera and talk to the people on TV while you kind of share your book with one another and find a healthy grief choice that you would do, okay? So you go ahead and begin. I'm going to talk over here for a minute, and then I'll be right back, okay? So I just wanted to talk to you about what's in the book. And these are some ideas of what you could do to choose to improve your physical needs while you're grieving. One of the very first things that you could think about is, how is your sleep going? Are you getting enough rest? And if you're not, maybe choose some really good steps to help you with getting a good night's sleep. Like relaxing and having some routines at the end of the day that kind of settle you down and help you sleep well. Another thing that is so important for our bodies physically is to get exercise. It helps our whole bodies move, and that also helps us when we need our rest at night. Eating good and healthy food is a perfect way for you to invest in your body physically while it's grieving. Avoid the sugars and definitely avoid the caffeine and high-fat food that's really hard to digest. That's hard when our stomachs are already in a knot, isn't it? So we want to drink plenty of water and get plenty of rest. If you can, get out in some sunshine. Maybe dig a hole and plant some trees or flowers, do some gardening. You see, these kind of physical steps can help our bodies through our grieving time. So I hope these ideas have been helpful for you while we've been all taking a look at our book, Comfort for the Day, and understanding our grief physiologically. I'll be back on stage in just a second. Okay, have you gotten an idea that there are some things that you can do that can really help you physiologically? Like, who would take a walk? Or who would choose to eat a little more healthy food right now while you're grieving? Anybody out here up for a cold shower? I know that's not the top pick of the list, but I will tell you, I did choose to take cold showers after Dawson died because I just couldn't bear the thought of feeling as I was feeling emotionally and then add to that being physically sick. That would have been so hard. So I did all I could do to keep my immunity boosted. And did you know that cold showers, finishing with a cold shower, not the whole shower, but finishing with a cold shower increases your white blood count? And that helps fight disease in our bodies. So that's one way that we can do that. So let's take a look. What are some of our options when it comes to our healthy grief? What is your plan to take care of your physical grief? Are you going to exercise? Eat really healthy food. How about plenty of water? Boy, that's a doable, isn't it? Getting some good rest. Sometimes that one's a challenging one. But there are some great helpful ideas in the book, Comfort for the Day. And last, if I can get it to come up, avoid those donuts. Avoid that extra sugary fat food because that is so hard on our systems. And our system needs every advantage that we can have so that we can grieve in a healthy way. I know a donut might be along the line of comfort food. And if you do it from time to time, just know that there could be just that little risk that you're setting yourself up for being closer to getting ill than getting well. So, our bodies grieve physically, don't they? Did you know that before? Some of us did and some of us didn't. Hopefully by learning this, it'll help you step into your grief, walk through your grief with better confidence and healthiness. Last and by no means least, we grieve spiritually. Just like our emotional and our physical grief is natural, normal, and necessary, so is our spiritual grief. It includes the times that we have a crisis of faith. It includes the time when our faith is strong, or both. It includes those questions that we ask ourselves. How is God playing a part in all of this stuff that I'm going through? Is he the cause for this suffering and pain? What other kinds of questions that might we have if we've encountered difficult griefs and loss that would include suicide or drug-induced losses or death. These are the hard ones, aren't they? The really hard ones. And so I find that the Psalms are full of these kinds of grief crisis psalms. I was just looking before I came today and came quickly upon Psalm 77 and 73. So if you want to write those down to go to. I used to wonder, why are these words of crisis, faith crisis in the Bible? Just here briefly, Psalm 77. Will the Lord reject forever and never again show favor? Has his faithful love ceased forever? Is his promise at an end for all generations? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? If we are honest, have some of us felt these thoughts, and thought we could never dare to say them? Who put it out there on paper? The psalm writers did. And then they ascribed music to go with it, and they would all sing. These honest experiences that people have when we go through a spiritual crisis in our grief and our loss. Of course, it doesn't stay that way. It goes on to say, so I say, I am grieved that the right hand of the Most High is changed. And then all of a sudden, he makes a shift. But I will remember the Lord's work. Yes, I will remember your ancient works. I will reflect on all you have done and meditate on your actions. And the end of Psalm 77 is talking about this triumphant walking through the sea that God had just parted. So you see, he went from his crisis of faith, kept working with that on paper until he came to the story, yes, I will remember how God guided his people through the waters. If he could do that, will he do what I need in my pain right now? Yes. So in our spiritual necessity to grieve, let us be very honest. Can you see why this is important to be honest? Because if we pretend with God, who knows that? He knows it. We're not fooling him, are we? So there's no longer a need to pretend with God, but instead to come very real with our questions. And so I need the next handout to be handed out for us. We're going to talk about grief letters to God. It's not a hard thing to do. And when we write grief letters to God, it's a wonderful thing to know that God doesn't care about our spelling. God doesn't mind what kind of handwriting we use. What does he care about is that our honest thoughts, those thoughts that we have, get put out on paper. That's what God cares about. So let's take a look about what putting our stuff on paper might look like. We're not calling it journaling today because some people have a real hard time with that word. So we're going to call it put your stuff on paper. Does that work? Put your stuff on paper. That's a pretty cool thing. That works really well. So what is putting your stuff on paper? It is not school. No one's going to correct, grade, or read what you put on paper. Got it? This is not school. Putting your stuff on paper is absolutely confidential. What you do with this paper is completely and totally up to you. Sometimes it might be just the piece to share with someone to help them understand how you're feeling. It's a good tool to communicate. This is what I'm experiencing. Some of us might say, no, this is way too confidential, way too private. So I think the best place for this piece of paper is in the shredder or in the burn pile. and that's absolutely fine. Others, I know of a mother who puts her papers in between the mattresses of her bed. She needs to keep them because she wants to refer to them again. She just doesn't want her children to find them. So that's your choice. What you write on paper is your stuff and you're confidential. This is not a dear diary. This is what I did today, and we make a list of what we did today. This has nothing to do with a list of what we did today, who we saw, where we went. This is all about where I'm at right now in my thoughts, my grief, my emotions. Where do I need the help? What's happening to me right now? It's all about reflection. So reflecting about how we are thinking and feeling and what our actions are. Let's see. I'm having a little trouble with our remote. See if we can get the next ones down. It's our freedom to move forward, and that's an amazing thing. And if we address it to God, is He listening? Is He reading? Does He know? Yes. And can He do something about it? Absolutely. Absolutely, He can. So, I would be a horrifically not good teacher if I taught you all about the value and the importance of putting your stuff on paper and just finished our day today. So, I'm going to be a great teacher and give you this moment to practice. I've got 3, if I can get the third one up here, jump lines for you to start with. Choose any one of these 3. My grief and sadness feels like, or some of my favorite memories are, or trusting God with this process. Start with that line, and you continue to go on with it. I've got my phone with me with my little timer, and I'm going to do what we did yesterday. You have got 4 minutes to put your stuff on paper. And while you're putting your stuff on paper, I'm going to go over and talk to the people that are watching on the TV and chat with them for a little bit. And when our 4 minutes are over, I'll be back to finish and wrap up our time together. You may begin. So, what do you think, my television viewer? Do you think putting your stuff on paper is going to be too hard? Maybe you've even pulled a paper out and you're already starting, so just mute me and don't listen any further. But if you're still needing a little bit of encouragement, I want you to know that by putting your stuff on paper, you are actually releasing your grief. You see, our hearts and our minds and our bodies were never intended to keep hold of and to hold on to those emotions, those thoughts. They were never intended to be put in some mental closet or on some mental shelf and left unattended to. This is actually one of the best therapeutic grief tools you can use. People have used it all around the world, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Just in 4 minutes, those that are here in this audience today are going to be able to express something that they quite possibly have never, ever put on paper. And do you know how that's going to feel? That is going to leave them with such a sense of relief and freedom. It might leave them with some more curiosities and questions that they didn't think they had, but now they know they do. So it might lead to the next step in their putting their stuff on paper. And so if you can get a copy of Comfort for the Day, Living Through the Seasons of Grief, this book is intended to do your journaling in, to do your writing in. It's given with scripture guidance, and I'm going to talk about that to everybody in a little bit, so you might hear this double. But I can't emphasize enough to you as to how important it is for you to do this. I was once at a weekend workshop and seminar, and a gentleman who had some real issues with his brother over the death of their parents began to write about his brother and how he was feeling about him and how he wanted to think and feel differently.
And in 4 minutes of time, he processed from one paradigm to the next. When we were all done that day, he came forward and he said, "Thank you so much. This has helped me so much with my relationship that had been estranged with my brother following the death of my parents." So, I just wanted to give you a little piece of evidence and encouragement. There was a real live human person just in modern time who used this journaling and putting their stuff on paper. But you always have David to go to, one of our greatest, most courageous, honest grief journalers that we have in Scripture. So I hope you really do take advantage of doing this piece of your grief work, because it will make all the difference. See you on the stage in a minute.
How many of you is this the first time you've put your stuff on paper? Good job, good job. Excellent, excellent. You are among the most brave and courageous at camp meeting, not only to come and attend this workshop, but actually to participate. Trying something new for the first time can feel very awkward, but I would love to hear from you after we're all done. Just tell me, was it like too hard? Was it too awkward? Did it help open up your ideas of understanding your own self and your own grief? Just give me some reflection. I'd love to hear that. We have now come to the end of today's workshop. Our most significant spiritual part to our healthy grief is to work through our regrets, our bitterness, our anger, our blame, the what-ifs, the woulda, coulda, shouldas. And tomorrow, we're going to discover how forgiveness sets us free to grieve well. It's our most important healthy grief tool. And it's all made available to us for free from God. So we won't want to miss tomorrow, because forgiveness is life-changing for our grief. Sounds good? Will you with me tomorrow? So if those of you that want to be in touch with us through our website or on our Facebook page, that information is on the screen. Those of you that are saying, I think I still need to get a book, Comfort for the Day, Living Through the Seasons of Grief. They're just $15 at the ABC, so make sure you stop there and pick one up, because you'll want to bring it with you tomorrow for our next session. Thank you so much for coming today and sitting in this hot room in this space. Would you bow your heads with me as we thank God? Father, your presence with us has been very evident. We are so completely aware that to do this grief work, we must be guided by the wisdom and the comfort of your Spirit. Thank you so much that was the eager gift you gave to us, because you knew how difficult it is to live here on planet Earth until you return to take us home and wipe away all our tears. Oh, for that day that we long for, but until then, we want to choose to our healthy grief options, to let you guide us through our grief. Thank you. In Jesus' wonderful name we pray. Amen.